Welcome back to the Foundations of Learning podcast, where we help you reclaim your child's education and help you to create lifelong learners in your children. Today, we are going to talk about the school system, how it was built and why it was built, and the homeschooling revolution. Now, a lot of people are like, the system is broken. The system is not broken. It is built exactly as it was intended to, and it is doing fantastic in that way. So what we're going to be talking about today is what the history of the public schools are, what the main goal of the public schools is income tax a coincidence? It's failing. Is homeschooling or alternatives the revolution that we really need for better outcomes for all? And then we're going to talk about that pesky thing that everyone says, I didn't learn that in school, and why that might actually be something that you might not want to learn in school. And is homeschooling the true revolution to break out of this matrix? Let's talk about it. Is the system rigged, or was it built this way? Schools as we know them today weren't always around. All right, we would learn what our parents did, and then we would do that, right? And the cycle repeated. There were school systems throughout history, but it still didn't look exactly like what we know as school today. And they were not really the norm. Compulsory schooling was set up the way it is today for a reason, which we will get into. And they don't learn things like taxes or how many works or investing, etc., or simply just how to learn things for a reason. So let's start at the very beginning of compulsory schooling and where we got this idea from. We are going to be talking about the Prussian model. So Frederick William I of Prussia, he reigned from 1713 to 1740. He introduced one of the first laws mandating compulsory primary education. This was in 1717. He issued a royal decree requiring all children between the ages of 5 and 12 to attend school. And this was in the Kingdom of Prussia, which is now modern day Germany. So Frederick William wasn't a progressive educator. He was just a militaristic ruler obsessed with discipline, obedience, and service to the state. His nickname was actually the Soldier King. Now, while the decree mandated basic literacy and religious instruction, that wasn't the end goal. The real aim was to train obedient, submissive citizens who did not question authority. He also wanted to create future soldiers who were literate enough to read orders, but not free-thinking enough to resist them. He wanted to weaken the influence of the family unit in favor of allegiance to the state and the church. He wanted to promote nationalism and loyalty to the crown, not independent thought or personal freedom. And he even developed standardized testing conditioned for boredom, monotony, bells to signal it's time to move, dark, boring halls, prison-like buildings, standing in line, restrictions on movement. Is this sounding a little familiar? So let's talk about how did we go from saying, Prussian model, that sounds interesting, to what we see today in public schools. So we're going to talk about American education and Horace Mann, because Horace Mann is actually deemed the father of our education system. He lived from 1796 to 1859. His role, I would say, in this is education reformer. He was the first secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education, and this is how he came to understand the Prussian model. So he visited Prussia in 1843, and he was deeply impressed by their state-run standardized education system. He admired the trained teachers, which were state certified. He loved the uniform curriculum. He loved centralized school administration, compulsory attendance laws. Now, why is this? I actually read his journal. It's called like the Common School Journal because I'm a weirdo, and he definitely believed that education was a way to Americanize the savages. Those were his words. He didn't like the Irish. He didn't like the Native Americans. He didn't like really anyone that was quote unquote different from him. And he thought that we need to civilize the masses. That was like his main belief. And at that time, I mean, I guess you could say we were maybe going through an identity crisis as America, and we were trying to figure out what our compass was, or our beliefs and our values and things like that. But he thought that maybe if we do this, it's going to civilize the masses. It's going to reduce crime and poverty. Maybe it'll create more of a unified, moral, obedient population. He wanted obedience. He really liked obedience. So like the Prussian system, it wasn't about creativity or critical thinking. It was about shaping the ideal citizen. But in the US, the ideal citizen was being redefined. So in come the industrialists. Now, these guys loved the idea of what Prussia was talking about, what Horace Mann was talking about. And you maybe already know who I'm going to talk about, but we're talking John D. Rockefeller, we're talking Andrew Carnegie, we're talking Henry Ford, right? We had Standard Oil, we had the steel empire, we had the automobile manufacturing, and they actually funded and supported the education systems not to raise free thinkers, but to create dependable, compliant workers for their factories. So just as the Prussian model wanted to create people that were in the military or soldiers, they wanted to create workers. So it's kind of the exact same concept, and they kind of needed the same things, right? They wanted them just literate enough to, follow orders, but not thinking enough to, disobey these orders. And the General Education Board was actually created in 1902, which was founded by Rockefeller, and the GEB funneled millions into shaping public education. So one infamous quote, which is attributed to Frederick T. Gates, which was a very close associate with Rockefeller, he said, "We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning. We shall train them just so far as to be efficient helpers." That was about utility, not enlightenment. That is what our system was built on. So when you look at the Prussian model and you think back to what he really wanted, right? He wanted them to be bored. He wanted monotony. He wanted bells and things to tell you that you need to go on to the next task. Well, when we look at American education, you have an emphasis on routine and repetition and punctuality. You have graded classrooms that are based on age and not on ability. You have the ringing bells, the sitting in rows like a factory floor. You have teaching students to follow instructions, not question them. Independent learning, creativity, or critical inquiry, that is all discouraged in a classroom. And so really, when you think about what the main goal of school is, it's go to school, get a good education, and get a job. That's really like what the pipeline is. Maybe you go to college, but even at the end of that, it is main goal, get a job, right? Work for somebody else for the rest of your life, or for 35 years, retire, and then get a little bit left over to do what you would like to do. In that, you also don't learn a love for learning, right? You don't even really understand what learning actually is, because all you've ever thought of learning is somebody at the front of the room telling you something, you learning that, taking a test on it, and then forgetting it. Like that's what learning is to us, right? And so then we're like, oh, I hate school. I can't wait to leave. So let's talk about American education and workers and taxes and how the government also plays a role in this, because really our public schools are just government schools, and how every piece to this actually benefits if you are a part of the cog. So by 1918, every U.S. state required children to attend government-run schools. It was a federal law that you had to do this. In 1913, the 16th Amendment established the federal income tax. Now, probably thinking like, why does that matter? Well, for the first time, the government had a guaranteed stream of revenue straight from the paychecks of citizens. So now it was, hey, everybody's going to get a job. We can tax everybody, a certain percent, and so on and so forth. So why does this matter? Suddenly, the federal government could fund massive social systems, including public schools, bureaucracies, welfare programs, forever wars, and so on and so forth. And obviously, a lot of this had to do with the Federal Reserve being put into place as well, and being able to print money out of oblivion. But these taxes also helped us in doing these things. So it no longer relied on the tariffs or the state cooperation. It could just grow and grow and grow. With both a federally approved standardized education system and a constant flow of tax dollars, the government now had both the funding and the means to shape citizens from a very young age. Children are going to be taught by the state, funded by the taxes of their parents, to serve the interests of both not only the government, but the corporations. Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford funded education reforms that emphasized uniformity, obedience, job readiness, not critical thinking. That is literally what grades are. Your grade is not on have you mastered something, it's will you make a great employee. That is why we created the system of grades. Meanwhile, the government adapted these systems because they reduced resistance, they kept the population busy and managed and under control, and then it also created tax-paying, law-abiding citizens who wouldn't rock the boat. The state got order and loyalty, and the corporations just got trained labor, and the parents were slowly pushed out. And as you can see, if you go to school board meetings and all of that, you are still not being listened to, but that's because it was never the point to actually educate your child. It was to create obedient and docile citizens. And so when you feel like you're not heard, it's because they truly don't care, and that's really not the main mission. And educators are kind of stuck in this. When you go into education, obviously, it's because you love kids, you love learning, you love teaching, you love helping, all of these great attributes. And that empathy that you have, I feel like, gets weaponized, and you are trained to really manipulate behavior with your students. And a lot of that is through the behavioral theorists and things like that you learn about. And so when you get into this system, it obviously you have a bunch of kids in your class, which is never going to come or have good outcomes, right? If you have 25 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds in a classroom all at one time with differing abilities and different backgrounds and traumas and different things that are happening in their lives, it is near impossible to get every single one of those kids where they are supposed to be on grade level. And so it's something that you really have to think about, that we know how to fix this problem. We have seen studies for best practices, and we have seen other countries like Finland that have drastically changed or adapted to a different way, and they are succeeding. They are outperforming almost everyone in the world, and it's because they know what kids actually need, and they actually want their children to succeed. And maybe our system is not as sinister as it was in the beginning, and we're just stuck in this system because it's so big now that it's hard to break it down and do something different. But let's talk about what happened by the 20th century in American schools. Reading and writing are the cornerstones of your child's education. Without the right foundation, they can struggle, but with the right tools, they can soar. That's where the 5 Foundations of Reading Ecourse comes in. This course is designed to teach parents how to help their children master phonological awareness, which is the essential first step in literacy, phonics skills like decoding spelling patterns for fluent reading and writing, segmenting and blending, which are key strategies for becoming a confident reader, and orthographic mapping so that your child can learn spelling patterns and use them effectively. Last, you'll learn about high-frequency words, which are essential for fluency in everyday reading. You'll also learn the most effective ways to teach these skills, making learning time productive and enjoyable for both you and your child. Whether your child is ahead or catching up, this course equips you to support their journey to literacy success. Start today by visiting k3homeschoolfoundations.com or check out the link down below. So children by the 20th century spent most of their days in government buildings. Their worldview was definitely shaped by state-approved curriculums. Their families were funding it through compulsory taxes. So you have compulsory taxes, you have compulsory schooling, and when they graduated, they entered a system that was built to keep them dependent on jobs, institutions, and the same government that helped raise them. So how are we doing? Is this system actually helping our kids learn, or is it just helping us to create workers that are just competent enough? So as of 2024, the NAEP score, so this is the national report card for America, essentially, only 31% of fourth graders are proficient in reading, 30% of eighth graders proficient in math. Scores are actually the lowest they have been in decades, although if you go back all the way to 1979, which for some reason, I have not been able to find that chart in the last little while. It's like it's disappeared from the internet. So anywho, but if you go back to 1979, because that was when the Board of Education was actually created, or the Department of Education was created, and that's when we actually started tracking scores. If you go all the way back to then, the scores really have not moved that much. They have pretty much stayed the same. Now, there's a lot of reasons that is, but they are the lowest in decades. It's not saying much. It's especially low in the high poverty areas. Despite spending more, we are falling behind. There is actually no data that says if we spend more money, then it's going to help the students succeed. And that is because we are looking at the wrong things. Our system, like I said, I don't know that it's failing. I think it's just kind of working as intended. We are pushing out competent enough kids to be able to do jobs. Now, like I said, more money, more problems. The US spends $15,000+ per student a year, and we outperform almost no one in reading, math, science, history, none of the above. So what the data says is only targeted spending, so we're talking teachers, aides, tutoring, improves learning. Fancy buildings, tech, and admin equal no measurable impact. Those things really don't matter. Teaching strategies over budgets. All right, we need quality instruction. That is going to be the number one predictor of success. So we need explicit structured reading and math instruction. We need small group, data-driven support. We need strong teacher training and support. And it's not about more funding. It's about the methods that we are using. And we know this, but somehow it's still not changing. Now, some people might say that school choice is a bad thing, that competition is a bad thing because it's going to make it so that, these poor kids that can't have, the same access to private schools and online schools and all of these things, that might be a better education, which is kind of ironic because people will tell me that they got a great education in public school, and maybe that was your experience, or that public schools are great, but then in the same breath, they'll say that it's not fair to poor kids, that rich kids get to go to private schools and online schools. So it's kind of ironic because you are literally saying that the public school is great, but then in the same breath saying it's not. Kind of ironic. But anyways, let's look at a little study because I think this is very interesting. Competition is good. Areas with charter and private schools nearby actually have improved public school outcomes. There's more innovation and responsiveness, and NBER, Florida, and Indiana studies all show it's modest but consistent gains in test scores and attendance, and public schools improve when families have options. Now we're kind of seeing this. I actually just read an email from, I think it was like the Libertas Institute, and they were talking about how there's districts in Utah near me that are considering micro schools. This is a big win for kids everywhere, because what that means is that there are so many kids that are unenrolling from schools that it's actually harming the public schools, and they are having to adapt. They are having to change. They are having to actually bring parents a service that they actually want. And I think that is so important. And that is how we're actually going to change this. Whether you like it or not, the more that kids are being pulled from the schools, the better off our schools will be. I know it doesn't make sense to some people, but that really is the truth. Now let's talk about that little statement of, I didn't learn that in school. Well, there's probably a reason that you didn't learn it in school, and you probably didn't want to learn it in school because they're probably not going to tell you the whole truth. Things like how inflation works, how money is created via the Federal Reserve, how to budget, invest, or build assets, how debt and taxes actually shape your life, problem solving, business, entrepreneurship, self-sufficiency, true political history. None of these things are going to be taught. And if they are, you're going to get little truths that keep you in the cog that they want you in. They want you to stay within that system. They want you to be dependable on them. The corporations want you to go work for them. They want your kids to go work for them, right? Like there's so many things that if they were to teach you this, you'd probably be burning down what we know of our systems today. Parents, have you ever wondered what your kids are really learning about important topics like taxes, freedom, and responsibility? As an educator, I once had to teach a social studies lesson that only focused on the positives of taxes, completely ignoring the downsides of over-taxation or the importance of personal responsibility. It made me realize how limited the perspective is in many traditional curricula. That's why I'm so passionate about the Tuttle Twins books. These books teach kids both sides of important issues like economics, freedom, and entrepreneurship in a way that's fun, engaging, and easy to understand. They help children think critically and understand the world in a more balanced way. If you're ready to check it out, use my link down below to explore their incredible resources, give your kids the tools to think for themselves, and support my podcast. So when we think about that, you're thinking, well, if I didn't learn that in school, like how can I learn that? I've got some books for you. The Tuttle Twins books are amazing. So you don't have to learn it in school because learning does not stop at the classroom. You can learn whatever you want and you can teach your kids whatever you want. And they have amazing books, seriously, that go through a story of these two twins and they go on adventures and they get to learn about all of these things and the truth about what these things actually mean for them in the future. They talk about inflation. They talk about socialism and different political ideologies. They talk about budgeting, investing, problem solving, critical thinking, entrepreneurship, self-sufficiency, taxes and debt and financial literacy. Like they literally go over all of these things that you think, I didn't learn that in school, and you get to learn alongside your child. They have parent guides that go along with it. Just so many amazing things. You can have them in the physical book, you can have them in audiobooks, but seriously, I can't recommend this resource enough. And in the future, when I am homeschooling my own children, when they're old enough to get into that, we will be reading these books together and we will be learning these things together. So let's talk about, like, if you learned all of these things in school, what would that mean for the current systems in place? So if you truly learned about financial literacy, that would lead you to questioning the system. That would mean less dependence on government programs, and that would be more family-centered entrepreneurship, more than likely. The current system benefits from citizens who spend, borrow, and stay in debt. They work for wages instead of building wealth, and they look to the government for security. The consequence is that we're raising generations of kids who can't explain what a mortgage is, but hey, they know how to take a standardized test. So let's kind of look at education outside of the system. Like if we're looking at traditional schooling versus alternative education, with traditional schooling, you have that standardized, rigid environment. In alternative education, you have customized and flexible environment, indoctrination, innovation. You have time away from family, more time with family. You have a one-size-fits-all model. You have child-led and mastery-based. You have workers in training, and you have thinkers, builders, and creators. Children who attend traditional school spend as little as 3 to 5 hours a day with their parents, most of it not focused on learning, while the school system becomes the dominant influence in their development. So it is important to understand that when you have a child that is even in a private school or public school or wherever, and everyone separates for the day and then comes back, it's important that we make sure that we are doing as much as we can during that time to work with our children, to connect with our children, to really create a strong relationship with them so that we can help them to navigate this world that they are in, and then help to, teach things that are not taught in school, right? That is your chance to do that. When we're looking at education outside of the system, it's really that the main point is the revolution is not in the classroom. It is in the kitchen. It's in the backyard. It is in the living room. That is where real learning begins. It begins at home with you. And it's not just education, it's freedom. So when we're thinking about education versus schooling, they are two very different things. And if we want to create lifelong learners, we really have to help them to understand the world that they are living in, how to navigate that world. And really, that is your job. And unfortunately, with the schools right now and not being able to effectively teach kids to read and write and do math and all of these different things, sometimes that's going to have to go into your hands, which sucks because you are sending them there. You're hoping they're going to learn something, right, and be successful. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. And so I think as parents, we just really need to understand what the system is about so that we can reclaim our child's education and really help our children to understand that real learning does not start and end in a classroom, and that it's something that we do all of the time. But the more you understand it, the easier it's going to be to help you navigate it and your child navigate it. If you liked this episode, subscribe to the channel, like it, share it with someone else, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an update. Literacy is the foundation of learning, and every child deserves the tools to succeed. If you're ready to take the next step in your child's education, check out my website at k3homeschoolfoundations.com for resources, curriculum, and support to make literacy simple and effective.